while the ruthless Mafia boss, Julian Blackwood, coldly ordered his men to tear the city of Chicago apart to find the woman he had been obsessively searching for over the past 4 years, completely ignoring his own bleeding wound as it was being stitched up. Across town, Lily Evans was being pushed to the absolute edge of despair. She had just caught her deadbeat boyfriend, Derek, cheating on her, only to discover the devastating truth. He had gambled away the entire life-saving fund she had desperately scraped together for her dying father's heart transplant. Driven into a corner, she had no choice but to endure a grueling night shift as a cleaner at the notorious underground nightclub, the Obsidian. Yet, tragedy refused to let her go. Chaos erupted when a gang of armed thugs suddenly stormed the venue, brutally taking her hostage and pressing a gun to her head to threaten the crowd. Just as her life hung by a precarious thread, an overwhelming, powerful figure emerged, ruthlessly decimating the attackers in a flash of violence. As the blood settled and their eyes finally met, the undisputed king of the underworld stepped forward, his deep, fiercely possessive voice cutting through the silence. "Found you, little kitten." Reaching out to pull her from the jaws of death, he officially dragged the desperate, debt-ridden young woman into an inescapable, dangerous spiral of fate. His large hand wrapped around her delicate wrist with an iron grip that left no room for resistance. The heavy scent of gunpowder and metallic blood lingered in the air as Julian guided her through the carnage. Lily stumbled over her own feet, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The terrifying reality of the massacre around her clashed with the strange, suffocating heat radiating from the man holding her. She did not know this dark savior, yet his men parted like the Red Sea the moment he stepped forward, bowing their heads in absolute submission. He did not utter another word as he led her out of the suffocating basement of the nightclub and into the biting chill of the Chicago night. A sleek black limousine waited by the curb, its doors held open by men in dark suits. Before Lily could process the situation, Julian practically lifted her into the opulent interior of the vehicle. The door shut with a heavy thud, trapping her inside a quiet, intimate space with the most dangerous man in the city. The car merged into the neon-lit streets. Lily huddled in the corner of the plush leather seat, her cleaner uniform stained with dirt and someone else's blood. She was trembling uncontrollably. Julian sat beside her, his posture relaxed, but his dark eyes intensely fixed on her pale face. He looked like a predator observing a captive bird. "You are shaking," Julian noted, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet cabin. He unbuttoned his custom-tailored suit jacket and draped it over her trembling shoulders. The fabric smelled of expensive cologne and danger. Lily clutched the lapels of the jacket. Her mind was a chaotic storm. She had just survived a hostage situation, but the impending doom of her reality crashed back down upon her. Derek had stolen everything. Her father was lying in a hospital bed, his time running out with every passing second. The doctors had been clear. Without the surgical deposit, they would remove him from the priority transplant list by tomorrow morning. She looked at the man beside her, Julian Blackwood. The whispered rumors of the underworld claimed he owned half the city and could erase a life with a single nod. He had wealth beyond imagination. If she walked out of this car and returned to her empty, shattered life, her father would die. This terrifying, powerful stranger was her only remaining lifeline. "Mr. Blackwood," Lily started, her voice cracking. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to sit up straight and meet his piercing gaze. "You saved my life tonight. I do not know why you called me that name or why you intervened, but I owe you my life." Julian leaned closer, the shadow of a smirk playing on his lips. "You do owe me, Lily, and I always collect what is mine." The fact that he knew her name sent a cold shiver down her spine, but she could not afford to let fear paralyze her. Desperation made her reckless. "Then let me make a deal with you," she pleaded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I have nothing left. I was robbed of everything I owned just hours ago, but I have a father who is dying in the intensive care unit. He needs a new heart, and the hospital requires an immediate deposit. I will do whatever it takes. I will work for you. I will clean your buildings, scrub your floors, Do absolutely anything you ask of me." The amusement faded from Julian's aristocratic features, replaced by a cold, calculated intensity. He reached out, his callous thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw, a touch that felt both tender and terrifyingly possessive. "I do not need another cleaner, little kitten." "How much money are you asking for?" Lily stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. She stared into his dark, fathomless eyes and gathered every ounce of courage she possessed in her fragile body. $1 million, she whispered, the astronomical number sounding absurd, leaving her lips. Silence blanketed the car. For a long moment, Julian just stared at her. The audacity of a destitute cleaner demanding such a fortune from a mafia boss right after he had just slaughtered men to save her was staggering. Most people would be begging for their lives, yet this fragile woman was trying to strike a bargain. He saw the fierce, unyielding devotion in her eyes, a fiery resilience that deeply captivated him. It was the exact same light he remembered from that rainy night 4 years ago. $1 million, Julian repeated slowly, testing the weight of the words. He leaned back against the leather seat, a dark, dangerous aura expanding around him. That is a very steep price for a woman who has nothing to offer but her desperation. "You're asking for a miracle, Lily Evans." "I am begging for my father's life," she countered, her tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "Please. I am intelligent. I am hardworking. I will pay off every single penny, even if it takes me the rest of my life." Julian's gaze dropped to her trembling lips, a possessive hunger awakening deep within his chest. He did not care about the money. To him, $1 million was pocket change. But he cared about tying this woman to his side so tightly she could never escape. He wanted her complete submission, her mind, her body, and her future. "I will give you the $1 million tonight," Julian said, his voice dropping to a seductive, lethal whisper. "But you will not pay it back by scrubbing floors. If you want my money, you will belong to me. Entirely." Lily stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The cold reality of his words settled over her. She was standing at the edge of an abyss, and Julian Blackwood was offering his hand, ready to pull her into the dark. The limousine arrived at the towering gates of the Blackwood estate, a fortress hidden in the darkest, most affluent corner of Chicago. Lily stepped out into the freezing night, her legs trembling as the massive iron doors closed shut behind her. The click of the lock echoed like the ceiling of a tomb. Julian led her into a sprawling, dimly lit study. The room smelled of old leather, expensive whiskey, and undeniable power. He gestured for her to sit in a velvet chair opposite his massive oak desk. Without missing a beat, Julian opened a drawer and tossed a thick folder onto the desk. He flipped it open, revealing crisp, typed pages. He slid a gold fountain pen toward her. "This is the agreement," Julian stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I will wire $1 million directly to Chicago Memorial Hospital tonight. Your father will have his surgery first thing in the morning. In exchange, you will sign this contract." Lily leaned forward, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Her heart sank with every word she read. It was a mistress contract. The terms were absolute and suffocating. She would belong to him for exactly 1 year. During that time, she was forbidden from leaving the estate without his explicit permission. She would be available to him 24 hours a day, at his every whim. She would have no private life, no male friends, and no secrets. But it was the final clause that made her blood run cold. "Clause number 7, Julian said, his eyes darkening as he watched her read. "You must never interfere with my future plans. And under absolutely no circumstances are you allowed to get pregnant. If you break this rule, the consequences will be severe." Lily swallowed the bitter lump in her throat. The cold, mechanical nature of the contract stripped away her dignity, reducing her to a mere possession bought with blood money. She thought of her father lying in the hospital, his chest rising and falling with agonizing slowness. She thought of Derek, who had thrown their future away for cheap thrills and gambling chips. She had no one else to turn to. Tears blurred her vision, falling silently onto the crisp white paper. She picked up the heavy gold pen. Her hand shook violently, but she pressed the nib to the signature line. With a few jagged strokes, Lily Evans signed away her freedom, her pride, and her body. Julian watched the ink dry. A dark, triumphant gleam flashed in his eyes. He picked up the contract, securing it in his desk, and then walked around to where she sat. He grasped her chin, forcing her to look up into his striking, ruthless face. "Welcome to your new life, Lily," he whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "From this moment on, you're mine." The very next morning, Lily found herself trapped in a gilded cage. The Blackwood mansion was breathtakingly beautiful, filled with priceless art and marble floors, yet it felt colder than a prison cell. All her cheap clothes were discarded and burned by the maids. In their place, her massive closet was filled with exquisite silk dresses, expensive lingerie, and diamonds. Julian controlled every aspect of her existence. He dictated what she wore, selecting deep reds and blacks that complemented her pale skin, marking her visually as his territory. Her phone was replaced. The only contacts allowed were Julian and the estate staff. She was completely isolated from the outside world. When she asked for updates on her father, Julian simply handed her medical reports provided by his private doctors, confirming the transplant was a success. She was relieved, yet the heavy price of that relief weighed on her chest every waking second. Julian was a terrifying presence. He ruled his criminal empire with an iron fist by day, returning to the estate late at night with the scent of smoke and violence clinging to his clothes. Whenever he was near, the air grew thick and unbreathable. He demanded her presence at dinners, sitting at the head of a long table while she sat quietly by his side. He would touch her hair, trace the line of her collarbone, and look at her with a ravenous hunger that made her skin burn. He was suffocating her with his extreme possessiveness. If a male servant so much as looked at her for a second too long, Julian would have the man dismissed immediately. Lily felt like a fragile porcelain doll locked in a glass display case, meant only for the eyes of the devil himself. She tried to maintain her emotional distance, reminding herself every day that this was merely a transaction. It was a 1-year sentence. But as the days bled into weeks, the dark, magnetic pull of Julian Blackwood began to blur the lines of her reality, wrapping her tighter in a dangerous, intoxicating web she could not escape. The stifling silence of the Blackwood estate was shattered on a gloomy Tuesday afternoon. Lily had sought refuge in the Grand Library, hoping to lose herself in the towering shelves of antique books and escape the suffocating reality of her existence. Her fragile peace was abruptly destroyed by the sharp, authoritative click of stiletto heels echoing across the marble hallway. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, revealing a woman who radiated arrogance and venom. It was Victoria Sterling, the infamous daughter of the Sterling cartel and the woman the criminal underworld recognized as Julian Blackwood's future wife. Victoria stepped into the room like a predator inspecting a lower life form. She was draped in expensive furs and dripping with diamonds, her sharp blue eyes locking onto Lily with pure disgust. She had clearly bypassed the security detail, using her status as the cartel heiress to barge into Julian's private sanctuary. "So this is the little charity case keeping my fiancé occupied," Victoria sneered, her voice dripping with poison. She circled the plush leather chair where Lily sat, looking down at her as if she were a stain on the immaculate rug. "I heard Julian picked up a stray dog from the slums, but I never imagined you would look so pathetic. A nightclub cleaner, was it not? Did you really think washing your face and wearing a designer dress would wash away the stench of cheap desperation?" Lily closed her book and slowly stood up. Her heart beat rapidly against her ribs, but she refused to let her fear show. She had survived the crushing poverty of the Chicago streets, the betrayal of the man she loved, and the terrifying brutality of a hostage situation. She was not about to cower before a spoiled mafia princess who had been handed the world on a silver platter. "I am well aware of my origins, Miss Sterling," Lily replied, her voice steady and remarkably calm. "But my presence here seems to be causing you a great deal of distress. It is quite fascinating." Victoria stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Distress? You flatter yourself, you little rat. You are nothing but a temporary plaything." a $1 million whore bought to warm his bed until our formal wedding takes place. Once the alliance between the Blackwood Syndicate and the Sterling Cartel is finalized, Julian will throw you back into the gutter where you belong. Do not dare to dream that you are anything more than a replaceable toy. Instead of crumbling into tears, a cold, calculating light entered Lily's eyes. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them, her posture radiating an unexpected regal grace. "If I am truly just a meaningless toy," Lily began, her tone analytical and razor-sharp, "then why are you standing in this room? A true queen does not need to visit the dungeon to hurl insults at a prisoner unless she is terrified that the prisoner holds the king's attention. You came all the way here, bypassed his guards, and sought me out simply to remind me of my place. That does not look like the behavior of a confident bride. That looks like the panic of a woman who knows she is entirely unwanted." Victoria's pale face flushed with rage, her pristine mask of superiority shattered. Unable to form a coherent response to the brilliant psychological strike, she raised her hand, aiming a vicious slap at Lily's face. Before the strike could land, Lily swiftly caught Victoria's wrist in midair. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by years of hard labor and a fierce determination to protect her own dignity. She held the shaking wrist firmly, her eyes locked with Victoria's furious gaze. From the shadows of the adjacent private office, the sound of slow, mocking applause broke the tension. Julian Blackwood stepped into the dim light of the library. He wore a tailored black suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, but his eyes burned with a dark, thrilling intensity. He had been standing there the entire time, silently observing the confrontation. "That is enough, Victoria," Julian commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried an absolute, terrifying authority that froze the air in the room. Victoria ripped her hand away from Lily, turning to Julian with a look of betrayed outrage. "Julian, you let this filthy peasant speak to me this way? I am your fiancée. I demand that you throw her out right now." Julian walked slowly toward them, his gaze never leaving Lily. He did not even spare a glance for the furious woman claiming to be his future wife. "You are an alliance, Victoria. Nothing more. You have overstepped your boundaries by entering my home and threatening what is mine. Leave the estate immediately, before I decide to reconsider the terms of our cartel agreement." The cold, ruthless dismissal hit Victoria like a physical blow. She realized in a horrifying instant that Julian would gladly burn the bridge between their two powerful families just to protect the fragile girl standing next to him. Trembling with humiliation and unspoken rage, Victoria turned on her heel and stormed out of the library, the doors slamming shut behind her. The silence that followed was heavy and electric. Julian closed the distance between him and Lily, invading her personal space until she was backed against the towering bookshelves. He reached out, his long fingers trailing down her delicate neck, feeling the rapid, lively pulse beneath her skin. A dark, obsessive smile curved his lips. "You have sharp claws, my little kitten," Julian murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper that sent shivers cascading down her spine. "I expected you to weep and beg for my protection. Instead, you tore her apart with nothing but words." Lily looked up into his fathomless dark eyes, her breath hitching. She saw the raw, unrestrained hunger in his expression. It was no longer just a desire to possess her body or control her circumstances. He was captivated by her mind, completely mesmerized by the fiery, unyielding spirit she tried so hard to hide. At that exact moment, Lily realized the terrifying truth. Julian Blackwood was not just keeping her as a prisoner to fulfill a contract. He was slowly pulling her into the deepest, darkest depths of his soul, and he had no intention of ever letting her go. Autumn bled into a freezing Chicago winter, and with the changing seasons, the suffocating dynamic inside the Blackwood estate began to shift in subtle, bewildering ways. The rigid lines of their transaction blurred under the weight of Julian and Lily spending every waking night together. The ruthless mafia boss who terrified the underworld started exhibiting a dark, suffocating tenderness behind closed doors. He would pull her into his lap while he reviewed cartel ledgers, his heavy chin resting on her shoulder. He would trace the delicate line of her spine until she fell asleep against his chest, holding her with a fierce, protective grip that felt terrifyingly akin to devotion. These stolen moments of quiet intimacy confused Lily, slowly chipping away at the icy walls she had built around her heart. But the fragile illusion of their twisted domestic life shattered when her body began to betray her. It started with a wave of blinding dizziness, followed by mornings where she could barely lift her head from the silk pillows without severe nausea forcing her to the bathroom. Lily tried to blame it on the stress or the rich food the estate chefs prepared, but a cold, creeping dread had already taken root deep within her mind. She needed to know the truth, and she could not risk using Julian and his team of private doctors. Pleading a desperate need to see her recovering father, Lily convinced Julian to allow her a brief visit to Chicago Memorial Hospital. Julian agreed, though he sent 2 massive armed guards to shadow her every move. When she arrived at the hospital ward, she found her father, Thomas, looking healthier than he had in years, his new heart beating steadily in his chest. After spending an hour by his bedside, Lily excused herself to get coffee, expertly slipping past the distracted guards in the crowded cafeteria hallway. She hurried down a sterile white corridor, slipping unnoticed into the private consultation room of Dr. Nathan Hayes. Nathan was a brilliant young physician and a loyal friend from her past, someone who knew the desperate lengths she had gone to for her father. Nathan locked the door behind her, his expression tight with concern as he took in her pale, trembling form. Lily explained her symptoms in a frantic whisper, pleading with him to run a rapid blood test and an ultrasound without logging it into the official hospital system. Understanding the grave danger she was in, Nathan agreed, quickly drawing her blood and preparing the ultrasound machine in the back room. The minutes that followed felt like an agonizing eternity. Lily lay on the examination table, staring blankly at the ceiling tiles as the cold gel was applied to her stomach. The silence in the small room was deafening. Then, Nathan stopped moving the wand. He stared at the monitor, his face turning completely ashen. He slowly turned the screen toward her, pointing a shaking finger at a tiny, flickering pulse of light in the center of the dark imaging screen. "Lily," Nathan whispered, his voice laced with pure terror. "You are pregnant. You are nearly 2 months along." The words struck her like a physical blow. The air vanished from her lungs. Lily shot up from the table, her hands instinctively wrapping protectively around her flat stomach. The flickering little light on the screen was a living, breathing testament to those dark, passionate nights locked inside Julian Blackwood and his gilded cage. It was his child, a baby created from a ruthless contract. Instantly, the chilling memory of the document she had signed flashed violently in her mind. Clause number 7. Absolutely no pregnancy. If you break this rule, the consequences will be severe. Julian was a man of absolute control and lethal consequences. He was the king of the underworld, and the entire city was buzzing with the news of his impending, highly anticipated alliance wedding to Victoria Sterling. A child born from a temporary, contracted cleaner would completely destroy his meticulously crafted empire and the cartel merger. He would never allow a weakness like this to exist. If Julian discovered the truth, he would undoubtedly force her to terminate the pregnancy to clear the path for his powerful new bride. Tears spilled over her eyelashes, falling hot and fast down her cheeks. The terrified little girl who had signed her life away for money was gone, instantly replaced by a fiercely protective mother. "Nathan, you must swear to me," Lily cried, grabbing the doctor by the lapels of his white coat. Her eyes were wild with desperation. "You must delete these records. You cannot tell a single soul. If Julian finds out about this baby, he will kill it and he will kill me. No one can ever know." Nathan looked at her terrified, tear-stained face and nodded solemnly, swearing himself to absolute secrecy. Lily wiped her face, smoothing down her designer dress to hide the frantic trembling of her hands. She had to return to the guards before they realized she was missing. She had to walk back into the lion den and smile at the monster who owned her, all while harboring a secret that could easily sign her death warrant. The ride back to the Blackwood estate was the longest journey of her life. Lily sat rigidly in the back of the armored SUV, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their violent trembling. The massive guards sitting across from her suspected nothing, completely unaware that the fragile woman they were protecting now carried the most dangerous secret in Chicago. Days turned into agonizing weeks, and the suffocating pressure inside the mansion grew exponentially. The underworld rumors finally erupted into public reality. The formal announcement of the impending marriage between Julian Blackwood and Victoria Sterling dominated every news outlet. It was hailed as the merger of the century, an invincible alliance that would solidify Julian as the undisputed ruler of the city. Stacks of high society magazines featuring Victoria in custom bridal gowns were carelessly left around the estate by the staff. Every glossy page, every whispered conversation in the hallways served as a brutal reminder of Lily and her disposable status. She was merely a shadow, a temporary distraction hiding in the dark while the king prepared to crown his queen. But the tiny, fragile life growing inside her changed everything. Lily spent hours locked in her luxurious bathroom, leaning over the marble sink as violent waves of morning sickness wrecked her body. She learned to muffle her gasps with heavy towels and run the shower at maximum heat to drown out the sounds. Every time she looked at her pale reflection in the mirror, her hands instinctively drifted to her lower abdomen. The terrifying clause of her contract echoed relentlessly in her mind. Absolutely no pregnancy. She knew Julian. She had seen the cold, calculating monster who operated without mercy. He was merging two massive criminal empires. A child born from a debt-ridden cleaner would be a catastrophic liability, a vulnerability he would never tolerate. Victoria would demand the child be eradicated, and Julian, the ruthless businessman, would not hesitate to clear the path for his powerful new dynasty. To him, she was just a breach of contract. To him, her baby would be a mistake requiring immediate elimination. This terrifying realization forced Lily to build an impenetrable wall around her emotions. She became an actress trapped in a deadly play. By day, she avoided the staff and stayed hidden in the library, wearing loose-fitting silk dresses to conceal the slight changes in her body. By night, her performance became a matter of life and death. Julian was consumed by the endless meetings and cartel negotiations leading up to the wedding. He returned to the estate late into the night, his dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion and raw aggression. But no matter how tired he was, his obsessive need for her never wavered. He would seek her out in the massive master bedroom, pulling her against his hard chest as if she were the only anchor keeping him grounded. One particular night, the air in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Julian lay behind her in the massive bed, his strong arms wrapping around her waist and pulling her back flush against his body. Lily held her breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. His large, calloused hand rested directly over her stomach. The physical contact sent a jolt of pure terror straight into her veins. "You are tense, little kitten," Julian murmured against her neck, his warm breath sending involuntary shivers down her spine. His fingers twitched, lightly pressing into the soft skin of her abdomen. "You have been distant lately, hiding away in the library, barely eating the dinners I order for you." Panic seized her throat, threatening to choke her. She forced her muscles to relax, forcing a soft, deceptive sigh past her lips. "I am just tired, Julian," she lied, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. "The house has been very chaotic with all the preparations. The staff is always rushing around." Julian tightened his grip, burying his face in her dark hair. "The chaos will be over soon," he stated, his tone dark and unreadable. "Just a few more weeks. Then everything will change. You just need to be patient, Lily." His words were meant to sound reassuring, but to Lily, they sounded exactly like a death sentence. He was talking about the wedding. He was talking about the day he would officially bring Victoria into this house and cast her aside. She closed her eyes, silent tears soaking into the silk pillowcase. She could not afford to be weak anymore. The helpless, indebted daughter who had begged for her life was gone. She was a mother now, and she would endure any humiliation, tell any lie, and suffer any pain to keep her secret safe. Julian Blackwood could own her body and her time, but he would never touch her child. Lily made a silent, unbreakable vow to the life growing inside her. She would survive this gilded cage just long enough to find a way out, no matter the cost. The fragile web of lies Lily had spun around herself finally unraveled on a freezing Thursday morning. Her changing body demanded medical attention. The severe morning sickness and dizzy spells left her dangerously weak, and she desperately needed prenatal vitamins to ensure the survival of her unborn child. Using her father as a shield, she pleaded with Julian for one more hour at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Julian granted her request, but his dark eyes were heavy with lethal suspicion. He had noticed her fading appetite, her constant fatigue, and the way she flinched whenever he pulled her too close in the dark. Lily arrived at the hospital and immediately slipped away from her massive guards, navigating the labyrinth of white corridors to reach the secluded office of Dr. Nathan Hayes. Nathan locked the door and quickly examined her, his face pale with worry. He handed her a plain white prescription bottle filled with essential vitamins, cleverly disguised as generic painkillers. "You are losing too much weight, Lily," Nathan whispered, gently holding both of her trembling hands to steady her. "The stress is going to hurt the baby. You cannot keep living in that house. We need to find a way to get you out." Before Lily could answer, the heavy wooden door of the office was violently kicked open. It slammed against the wall with a deafening crash. Julian Blackwood stood in the doorway. He was a terrifying vision of pure, unadulterated wrath. His custom suit mirrored the pitch-black darkness in his eyes, and the air in the room instantly dropped to a freezing temperature. He had not trusted her. He had followed her himself. And what he saw, his contracted mistress hiding in a locked room, holding hands with a handsome young doctor, ignited a blinding, psychotic jealousy within him. "Step away from her," Julian commanded. His voice was a lethal, quiet hiss that promised absolute destruction. Nathan froze, but he bravely stepped in front of Lily to shield her. "Mr. Blackwood, this is a misunderstanding." Lily was just not feeling well and came for a consultation. In a flash of terrifying speed, Julian crossed the room. He grabbed Nathan by the throat and slammed him brutally against the glass medical cabinets. The glass shattered to the floor in a cascade of sharp fragments. Lily screamed in absolute terror. "Julian, stop!" she cried, throwing herself forward and grabbing Julian by his thick, muscular arm. "Please let him go. He is just my friend. He is my best friend from college. He was just making sure I was healthy." Julian slowly turned his head to look at her. The fact that she was physically defending another man, begging for his life, sent a wave of toxic, uncontrollable fury straight into his heart. He dropped Nathan to the floor, where the doctor gasped for air, and seized Lily by the waist, hauling her flush against his rigid body. His grip was punishing. "You sneak away from your guards, you lie to my face, and you lock yourself in a room with another man?" Julian roared, his iron control finally snapping. "You think you can play me for a fool, Lily? You think you can find comfort in the arms of a pathetic doctor while you belong to me? It is not what you think." Lily sobbed, her hands pushing weakly against his solid chest. She desperately wanted to scream the truth. She wanted to tell him she was protecting his own child. But the chilling memory of the contract choked the words back down her throat. If she told him the truth, Nathan would die for knowing the secret, and her baby would be eliminated to make way for the Sterling alliance. "Then what is it?" Julian demanded, shaking her slightly, his eyes blazing with a tormented fire. "Tell me the truth right now, Lily, or I swear I will make him disappear from the face of the earth." Lily squeezed her eyes shut. Hot tears streamed down her pale face. "There is nothing to tell," she whispered brokenly. "I just needed a friend." Julian stared at her weeping face, his jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from stone. The betrayal he felt was a physical agony he had never experienced before. He did not say another word. He scooped her up effortlessly into his arms, ignoring her frantic protests and kicking legs, and carried her out of the hospital like a captive prize. When they returned to the Blackwood estate, the punishment was absolute. Julian carried her up the grand, sweeping staircase and threw her onto the massive bed in the master suite. He stood over her, a dark, imposing tyrant consumed by a jealous rage he refused to understand. "You wanted to test my boundaries," Julian said, his voice completely devoid of mercy. "Now you will learn the exact consequences of your betrayal. You are forbidden from leaving this room. You will not see the sun, you will not speak to the staff, and you will never step foot outside this estate again. You are mine, Lily, and I will lock you away from the entire world until you remember exactly who you belong to." Julian turned and walked out. The heavy oak doors slammed shut. The metallic click of the deadbolt echoed through the massive, luxurious room like a gunshot. Lily collapsed onto the silk pillows, sobbing uncontrollably into the quiet emptiness. The tragic misunderstanding had pushed Julian to the edge of madness, and now she was completely trapped in a beautiful, terrifying cage, entirely at the mercy of a monster she loved, hiding a child she was desperate to save. The luxurious master suite became a beautiful, suffocating tomb. 3 agonizing days had passed since the terrifying confrontation at the hospital. True to his dark promise, Julian had locked Lily away from the world. He did not return to the room, leaving her in total isolation. The heavy oak doors remained firmly deadbolt from the outside, guarded by men who were deaf to her pleas. The silence of the massive bedroom was designed to break her spirit and force her into absolute submission, but Julian severely underestimated the fierce maternal instinct burning inside her. Every passing hour of isolation only strengthened her resolve to protect the tiny, fragile life growing in her womb. The security of the Blackwood estate was legendary throughout the criminal underworld. It was an impenetrable fortress where every camera, every shadow, and every breath was meticulously monitored by Julian and his elite enforcers. Nobody entered the grounds without the explicit permission of the king himself. This absolute role, the very foundation of Julian's power, was about to become the source of Lily's most devastating nightmare. On the evening of the 4th day, the metallic click of the heavy deadbolt echoed through the silent room. Lily sat up from the silk sheets, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Instead of Julian, a tall man dressed in the standard uniform of the estate staff stepped inside, pushing a silver dining cart. Lily instantly froze. She had spent months observing the household staff, learning their faces and their nervous mannerisms. This man was a complete stranger. His posture was too rigid, his shoulders too broad, and his cold, dead eyes lacked the terrified respect the other servants always displayed. He carefully locked the door behind him, a subtle movement that sent a massive spike of adrenaline straight into her veins. "Dinner, Miss Evans," the stranger announced. His voice was flat and entirely devoid of emotion. He pushed the cart toward the center of the room, lifting a silver cloche to reveal a bowl of rich, steaming soup and a tall glass of milk. "Mr. Blackwood gave strict orders that you must consume every drop tonight." Lily slowly backed away, putting the massive king bed between herself and the stranger. Her sharp senses were screaming in warning. As the steam from the cart drifted across the room, she caught a faint, unnatural scent masking the savory aroma of the food. It was a sharp, bitter chemical odor that smelled remarkably like almonds and death. Victoria Sterling had used her vast wealth to bribe a corrupted maid, sneaking a professional cartel assassin right into the heart of the Blackwood estate. The poison in the food was designed to cause a fatal heart attack, leaving no trace behind. "I am not hungry," Lily stated, her voice remarkably steady despite the sheer terror gripping her chest. "Take it away. Tell him I refuse." The assassin realized his deception had failed. The polite facade instantly dropped. His cold eyes narrowed into lethal slits as he reached inside his tailored vest. He lunged forward with terrifying, explosive speed, vaulting over the edge of the bed. A long, wicked medical syringe filled with a clear, deadly liquid gleamed in his fist. If she refused to drink the poison, he was prepared to inject it directly into her heart. Lily fought back with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cub. As the assassin tackled her onto the mattress, she violently twisted her body, narrowly avoiding the deadly needle that tore through the silk sheets. She kicked out with all her might, her bare foot connecting solidly with his chest. The impact threw him off balance for a fraction of a second, giving her the desperate opening she needed. She scrambled off the bed, grabbing a heavy, solid brass lamp from the nightstand. The assassin lunged again, grabbing a handful of her dark hair. With a guttural scream of pure survival, Lily swung the brass lamp backward with every ounce of strength she possessed. The heavy metal smashed brutally into the side of the assassin's skull. The man let out a grunt of pain, stumbling sideways and dropping the syringe onto the luxurious rug. Lily did not hesitate. She grabbed the bowl of boiling hot soup from the cart and threw it directly into his face. The assassin howled in sheer agony, his hands flying up to clutch his burning eyes. The chaotic crashing and the horrific screams finally alerted the heavy security stationed at the far end of the hallway. The oak doors burst open with a deafening crash. 3 massive Blackwood enforcers swarmed into the room with their weapons drawn, tackling the blinded assassin to the marble floor and securing him instantly. Lily collapsed against the far wall, sliding down to the floor as her legs completely gave out. She wrapped her trembling arms protectively around her stomach, gasping for air. She stared at the deadly syringe lying just a few feet away, the lethal liquid still trapped inside the glass tube. As the enforcers dragged the bleeding assassin out of the room, a cold, suffocating despair wrapped its icy fingers around her throat. Her brilliant, analytical mind began to race, desperately trying to make sense of the horrific attack. Victoria Sterling hated her, but the Sterling cartel could never breach the ironclad defenses of this estate without inside help. Julian Blackwood controlled every camera, every guard, and every lock. He had explicitly forbidden anyone from entering her room. Yet, an armed assassin had walked straight through the front door with a master key. A horrific, devastating conclusion formed in her mind. Julian had caught her at the hospital. He must have hacked her medical records. He must have discovered the pregnancy. The chilling clauses of her contract echoed like a death knell in her ears. He had promised severe consequences for a child. He was marrying Victoria Sterling in less than a week to forge a billion-dollar empire. A pregnant, indebted cleaner was a catastrophic liability that would destroy his meticulously planned future. Lily closed her eyes, tears of absolute devastation pouring down her pale cheeks. She completely misunderstood the situation, firmly believing the terrifying logic her mind had constructed. The man she had unwillingly fallen in love with had not just locked her away to punish her. He had locked her in a cage and sent an executioner to slaughter her and their unborn baby to clear the path for his powerful new bride. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a condemned woman, and if she did not escape this fortress of death, Julian Blackwood was going to kill them both. The day after the terrifying assassination attempt, the Blackwood estate transformed into a heavily militarized fortress. Julian relocated Lily to a secure, vault-like suite on the highest floor of the mansion. He tripled the armed guards outside her door, yet he never once came to see her. His glaring absence only solidified the horrific narrative festering in her mind. She firmly believed he was avoiding her because his hard killer had failed, and he was simply biding his time for the perfect moment to finish the job. 3 days before the grand cartel wedding, a suffocating tension fell over the estate. The staff was intensely busy preparing the lower levels for the upcoming celebrations. Feeling trapped and desperately needing to know her fate, Lily carefully slipped out of her bed late at night. Her new suite was located directly above Julian's private study. She remembered that a heavy brass ventilation grate hidden in the corner of her closet connected straight to the ceiling of his office. Desperate for any shred of information, she knelt on the hard floor, pressing her ear against the cold metal. Voices drifted up through the dark shaft. It was Julian, his tone colder and more ruthless than she had ever heard. He was speaking with Arthur Sterling, the intimidating leader of the Sterling cartel and the father of Victoria. The wedding will proceed exactly as planned, Julian stated, his deep voice echoing through the vent. The alliance between our families is the only thing that matters, Arthur. Everything is prepared for the ceremony. And what about your little pet? Arthur demanded, a vicious sneer evident in his gravelly voice. Victoria is very displeased that the girl is still breathing inside this house. My daughter will not share her throne with a filthy cleaner, especially not one who might be carrying your bastard child. You know our terms, Julian." Lily held her breath, her hands trembling violently as she pressed them against her mouth to stifle a sob. "Lily Evans is nothing but a temporary plaything," Julian replied smoothly, without a single ounce of hesitation. "She is a peasant bought with a contract. She is completely unworthy of carrying my bloodline. Only a child with Victoria can inherit our combined empire. Do not worry about the girl, Arthur. I will dispose of her myself before the ceremony. The problem will be permanently erased." A sharp, agonizing pain ripped through Lily's chest, shattering her heart into a million irreparable pieces. The man she had unwittingly surrendered her soul to had just casually signed her death warrant to appease his new cartel partners. He did not care about her. He did not care about the innocent baby growing inside her. To Julian Blackwood, they were merely garbage waiting to be taken out. She did not realize that Julian was lying through his teeth to orchestrate a massive trap for the Sterling family. To her ears, the betrayal was absolute and final. Tears blinded her as she crawled away from the grate. Pure survival instinct completely eradicated any lingering love she held for the mafia boss. She had to escape, and she had to do it immediately. She remembered noticing an old, forgotten landline telephone hidden deep inside the massive estate library, a relic from the previous generation that was not integrated into the modern digital surveillance system. Waiting for the brief window when the guards changed their shifts, Lily crept out of her room, moving through the dark, cavernous hallways like a ghost. She reached the library and found the dusty phone hidden behind a row of ancient encyclopedias. With shaking fingers, she dialed the only phone number she knew by heart. "Hello," a groggy voice answered after several rings. "Nathan, it is Lily," she whispered frantically, her eyes starting toward the heavy mahogany doors. "You have to help me. Julian knows about the baby. I heard him making a deal with the Sterling cartel. He promised them he would kill me before the wedding. I am going to die if I stay here." On the other end of the line, Dr. Nathan Hayes instantly woke up, his voice filling with fierce determination. "Listen to me, Lily. Do not panic. I have a former patient who works in the city utility grid. He owes me his life. He told me the Blackwood estate relies on an external power station for its secondary security cameras and magnetic locks. If we overload that station, the entire mansion will lose power for exactly 3 minutes before the backup generators kick in." 3 minutes, Lily repeated, her mind calculating the massive distance from her suite to the outer gates. "That is barely enough time to cross the courtyard." "It has to be enough," Nathan urged. "Tomorrow night, Julian is hosting the cartel leaders for the final rehearsal dinner. His elite security will be entirely focused on the main ballroom and the perimeter, leaving the Western Service corridor vulnerable. At exactly midnight, the lights will go out. You must run to the old servant tunnels that lead to the river docks. I will be waiting there with a speedboat. We will get you out of Chicago." "Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for saving us," she choked out, placing a protective hand over her stomach. "Be ready, Lily," Nathan warned softly. "If he catches you, there will be no second chances." Lily hung up the phone, slipping back into the suffocating darkness of the mansion. Her blood ran cold, but her spirit was entirely unbroken. She was no longer a helpless victim trapped in a deadly contract. She was a mother preparing to go to war for her child. Tomorrow night, under the cover of absolute darkness, she would vanish from the king's grip forever, or she would die trying. The grandfather clock in the distant hallway chimed 12 times. Exactly at midnight, the entire Blackwood estate was plunged into pitch-black darkness. The distant music from the rehearsal dinner abruptly cut off, replaced by the frantic shouts of the security guards. This was her only chance. Lily burst out of her room, her bare feet silent against the marble floors. She navigated the pitch-black Western Service corridor by pure memory, her hands trailing along the cold wallpaper. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She reached the heavy wooden door of the old servant tunnels, pushed it open with all her might, and descended into the damp, freezing passage. The smell of the river grew stronger with every step. She could almost taste freedom. She reached the rusted iron gate that opened to the river docks. She pushed it ajar, expecting to see Nathan waiting in a speedboat. Instead, blinding halogen flashlights clicked on, completely shattering the darkness. Lily raised her hands to shield her eyes, but brutal, heavy hands grabbed her from both sides. A rough palm clamped down hard over her mouth, muffling her scream of sheer terror. As her vision adjusted to the harsh light, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. It was not Nathan. It was Victoria Sterling. The cartel heiress wore a wicked, triumphant smile, looking immaculate in a white designer winter coat. "Did you truly believe you could just run away in the dark, you pathetic little rat?" Victoria sneered, stepping close enough for Lily to smell her sickeningly sweet perfume. "My father and I have had eyes on the perimeter of this estate for weeks. We knew a rat would try to scurry out of the sinking ship." Lily struggled wildly against the massive cartel enforcers, but their grip was like iron. Panic consumed her. Nathan was nowhere to be seen, and she was completely at the mercy of the woman who wanted her dead. "Throw her in the van," Victoria ordered coldly. "We have a special place prepared for Julian's little whore." They dragged Lily away, throwing her into the back of a dark vehicle. The ride was a blur of terror and motion sickness. When the van finally stopped, she was hauled out into the freezing night air and dragged down a flight of crumbling stone steps. The heavy scent of incense and old dust filled her lungs. She realized with horrifying clarity where they had brought her. It was the massive Gothic cathedral in the center of the city, the exact location where Julian and Victoria were scheduled to be married the very next morning. The enforcers threw Lily onto the freezing stone floor of the cathedral basement. The damp, cavernous cellar was filled with discarded religious statues and broken pews. A heavy iron chain was brutally shackled to her ankle, tethering her to a massive stone pillar. Victoria slowly descended the stairs, her heels clicking ominously against the stone. She looked down at Lily with a gaze filled with absolute, venomous hatred. "Look at you," Victoria mocked, circling the trembling woman. "The great Julian Blackwood tossed you aside like absolute trash. You actually thought you were special because he warmed your bed. But the truth is, he agreed to dispose of you himself. I am simply doing him a favor by taking out the garbage a few hours early." Lily curled into a protective ball, wrapping both arms tightly around her stomach. She refused to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her cry, but the psychological torture was tearing her apart. The cold stone seeped into her bones. Victoria noticed the protective gesture. Her eyes narrowed, locking onto Lily's midsection. A cruel, terrifying laugh echoed off the basement walls. "So the rumors from my spies are true," Victoria whispered, crouching down to look Lily directly in the eyes. "You are carrying a bastard. How utterly repulsive. Did you think a filthy street rat could secure a throne by getting pregnant? Julian knows about that parasite, and he despises it just as much as I do. That is why he locked you up. That is why he handed you over to death." "Do not talk about my baby," Lily choked out, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fierce maternal rage. "If you touch me, Julian will kill you. Julian is going to marry me tomorrow morning right above our heads," Victoria spat, grabbing a handful of Lily's dark hair and pulling her head back. "While the choir sings and he slides the cartel ring onto my finger, you will be rotting down in the dark. And once the vows are sealed, I will come down here and carve that mistake out of you myself." Victoria released her, wiping her hands in disgust as if she had touched a disease. She turned and walked back up the stone steps. The heavy iron door slammed shut and the lock clicked into place, echoing with a terrifying finality. Left alone in the freezing, pitch-black basement, the weight of her devastating reality finally crushed Lily. She was chained in the dark directly beneath the altar where the man she loved was going to marry her tormentor. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking slowly as silent tears poured down her face, praying for a miracle that seemed absolutely impossible to reach. The morning sun pierced through the stained glass windows of the grand Gothic cathedral, casting vibrant colors across the bloodthirsty monsters gathered inside. The highly anticipated wedding of the century had officially begun. The pews were packed with the highest-ranking members of the Sterling cartel, completely unaware that they had just walked into an elaborate, inescapable trap. Julian Blackwood stood at the altar. He wore a flawless black tuxedo, his face an impenetrable mask of cold stone. He watched as Victoria Sterling walked down the aisle, draped in a magnificent white gown, her father Arthur beside her. Victoria beamed with arrogant triumph, firmly believing she had secured the ultimate power and disposed of her only rival. As Arthur handed his daughter over to Julian, the older cartel boss smirked, whispering a quiet remark about how glorious their combined empire would be. Julian did not smile back. He simply stared at the priest, waiting for the exact moment. The priest raised his hands to bless the union. "If anyone objects to this marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." Julian slowly reached inside his tailored jacket. "I object," he stated, his voice ringing out with lethal clarity. Before Victoria could even register the confusion on her father's face, the massive oak doors of the cathedral slammed shut and locked from the inside. The Blackwood enforcers, disguised as wedding guests and groomsmen, simultaneously drew heavy firearms from their coats. Chaos erupted instantly. Julian pulled a sleek black pistol and fired a single, perfect shot directly into the chest of Arthur Sterling. The cartel leader collapsed to the marble floor in a pool of expanding crimson. Screams of terror tore through the holy sanctuary as the Blackwood syndicate ruthlessly slaughtered the unprepared Sterling leadership. The wedding transformed into a flawless, perfectly executed massacre. Julian did not flinch. This was his master plan from the very beginning. He had used the promise of a wedding to gather all his enemies in one room to eradicate them completely, ensuring an absolute, untouchable empire to keep Lily safe forever. The gunfire faded into the agonizing groans of the dying. Julian lowered his weapon, standing amidst the carnage like a dark god of war. His right-hand man rushed up the steps of the altar, his face pale and completely frantic. "Boss," the enforcer panted, completely ignoring the blood-soaked floor. "We just got a transmission from the estate. There was a power grid failure last night. When the backup generators kicked in, Lily Evans was gone. The guards found a secret tunnel door open. She is completely missing." The entire world stopped spinning. The cold, calculated mafia boss shattered into a million pieces. A wave of blinding, suffocating panic violently seized Julian by the throat. Lily was out there, unprotected, carrying the most precious thing in his entire existence. A cruel, hysterical laugh broke his paralyzing terror. Victoria Sterling was kneeling on the floor next to the corpse of her father, her pristine white dress completely ruined with blood. She looked up at Julian with absolute madness shining in her eyes. "You planned to murder us all along," Victoria screamed, her voice cracking with insane laughter. "But you are too late, Julian. You lost your little street rat." Julian crossed the distance in 2 massive strides. He grabbed Victoria by her throat, lifting her feet entirely off the ground. His dark eyes were devoid of any humanity, replaced by the chaotic fury of a rabid beast. "Where is she?" Julian roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the cathedral. He pressed the hot barrel of his pistol directly against the forehead of his bleeding bride. "Tell me exactly where she is, Victoria, or I swear to God I will skin you alive right here on this altar." Victoria gasped for air, but her twisted smile remained. "She is already dead to you," she choked out, blood dripping from her lips. "I locked her in the dark. I told her you sent me to kill her and her filthy bastard child. She thinks you ordered her execution." The horrific realization struck Julian like a physical blow. Lily thought he wanted to murder their baby. She had run away in sheer terror because she believed he was a monster. The absolute agony of her misunderstanding tore his heart to shreds. "Where is she?" Julian repeated, his voice dropping to a terrifying, demonic whisper as he clicked the hammer of the gun. "Right beneath your feet," Victoria whispered maliciously. Julian dropped her to the floor without a second thought. He roared for his men to secure the cathedral and sprinted toward the back corridors. He moved like a man possessed by utter madness, kicking open every wooden door, tearing down heavy tapestries, and searching frantically for the entrance to the underground crypts. His lungs burned and his hands shook violently. He had slaughtered an entire cartel to build a safe world for her, but if he was too late to save her from the dark, he knew he would not survive the dawn. Julian tore through the ancient wooden door leading to the cathedral crypts, his breathing ragged and his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He sprinted down the damp stone steps into the freezing darkness. In the center of the pitch-black cellar, a small, trembling figure was chained to a massive stone pillar. "Lily," he breathed, his voice breaking with a raw, agonizing relief. He felt his knees beside her on the freezing floor, his large hands frantically pulling at the heavy iron shackles binding her ankle. Lily shrank away from his touch, her tear-stained eyes wide with absolute terror. She still believed Victoria's venomous lies. She thought he had come to the dark basement to finish the execution himself. "Do not touch my baby," she sobbed, wrapping her arms fiercely around her stomach and trying to crawl backward against the cold stone. Julian felt a blade of pure agony pierce his chest. The absolute terror in her eyes was a punishment far worse than death. "I am not here to hurt you," he choked out, gently cupping her pale face with his trembling, blood-stained hands. "I am here to save you. I love you, Lily. I swear on my very soul, I will protect you and our child." Before the fragile truth could fully settle between them, a chilling, hysterical laugh echoed down the stone staircase. Victoria Sterling stood at the entrance of the crypt. She had managed to grab a discarded weapon from the chaotic massacre upstairs before the enforcers could secure the entire perimeter. Her pristine white dress was soaked in her father's blood, and her eyes burned with pure, suicidal madness. "If I cannot have the Empire, neither will you," Victoria screamed, aiming the heavy black pistol directly at Lily's stomach. The gun fired. The deafening crack echoed violently off the stone walls. Julian did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He threw his massive body entirely over Lily, shielding her completely with his own flesh and bone. 3 consecutive shots tore through his back and shoulder. He let out a guttural groan, his heavy body collapsing onto the freezing floor beside her. His elite enforcers stormed down the stairs just a heartbeat later, unleashing a hail of bullets that ended Victoria Sterling permanently. But the devastating damage was already done. Julian lay in a rapidly expanding pool of his own blood, his dark eyes fluttering shut as Lily screamed his name in absolute horror. The emergency room at Chicago Memorial Hospital was a chaotic blur of shouting doctors and blinding white lights. Julian was rushed into the trauma bay, his pulse fading with every passing second. Lily stood frozen in the sterile hallway, her hands and torn dress completely covered in his warm blood. Dr. Nathan Hayes sprinted out of the operating room, his face pale and grim with despair. "He has lost too much blood," Nathan explained frantically, gripping Lily by the shoulders. "His blood type is incredibly rare, and the hospital bank is completely depleted because of a massive trauma incident earlier today. The emergency shipment will take 2 hours to arrive. If we do not get a transfusion in the next 10 minutes, his heart is going to stop forever." Lily did not even blink. A fierce, unbreakable determination ignited in her tearful eyes. "Take my blood," she demanded, rolling up the sleeve of her ruined dress. "I have the exact same rare blood type. I can save him." Nathan shook his head violently in protest. "Lily, you're pregnant. Taking the massive volume of blood he desperately needs will put your fragile body into severe shock. It could induce a traumatic miscarriage or even kill you. You are responsible for 2 lives now. You cannot take this risk." Lily looked through the glass window, watching the frantic surgeons desperately trying to revive the ruthless Mafia boss who had just taken 3 fatal bullets for her. He had sacrificed his own life to prove his devotion. He had thrown away his entire empire to keep her safe in the dark. "Without him, we would not even be here," Lily stated, her voice perfectly steady and resolute. "He gave his life for mine. Now I am giving it back. Take my blood right now, Nathan." That is an absolute order. Realizing he could not stop her fierce, unwavering resolve, Nathan quickly prepped her for the extreme transfusion. She lay on the hospital bed beside Julian, extending her pale arm. As the thick needle pierced her vein, draining her life force to save the undisputed king of the underworld, The edges of Lily's vision began to blur. She placed her free hand over her stomach, whispering a silent, desperate prayer for her unborn child before the world finally faded into complete darkness. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the first sound Julian heard. He slowly opened his heavy eyelids. Pain radiated from his chest and shoulder, but his dark eyes instantly darted around the sterile hospital room. Sitting in a chair beside his bed, with her head resting softly near his hand, was Lily. She was incredibly pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Dr. Nathan Hayes stepped into the room, a quiet smile gracing his exhausted face. He informed Julian that Lily had risked her own life and pushed her body to the absolute limit to give him a massive blood transfusion. By some absolute miracle, both Lily and the unborn baby had survived the severe trauma. Julian reached out, his weak fingers gently brushing through her dark hair. The touch woke her. Lily bolted upright, her eyes wide with fear that instantly melted into overwhelming relief when she saw his open, tender eyes. Tears freely streamed down her cheeks. She pressed her face against his large, warm hand. "You saved me," Julian whispered, his voice incredibly hoarse, but filled with a profound, earth-shattering love. "You took 3 bullets for me," Lily cried softly. "I thought you hated the baby. I thought you wanted us dead." Julian closed his eyes, a tear escaping his strict control. He pulled her gently closer. He knew it was time to tear down every single wall he had built. He looked deeply into her tearful eyes and began to explain the absolute truth. For years ago, Julian started, his voice steadying with emotion. "I was ambushed by a rival syndicate. I was bleeding out, disguised as a homeless beggar on a freezing, rainy Chicago street. People walked past me, disgusted by my presence. I was ready to die in the gutter, but a young college student stopped. She did not look at me with pity or disgust. She handed me a box of warm pizza, draped her red umbrella over me to keep the freezing rain away, and gave me a smile that brought me back to life." Lily gasped, her hands covering her mouth as the buried memory from 4 years ago suddenly resurfaced. The injured homeless man in the rain. It was him. "I looked for you every single day since that night," Julian confessed, his dark eyes shining with absolute devotion. "When I finally found you at that nightclub, my heart stopped. But you were so desperate, so terrified. I knew you would never accept a mafia boss. The contract, the $1 million, the terrifying roles, it was all a desperate excuse to bind you to my side. I wanted to protect you from the world. The wedding with Victoria was a fake setup from the very beginning. I orchestrated the entire ceremony just to gather the Sterling cartel in one room and wipe them out permanently, ensuring they could never threaten you or our child. I never wanted anyone but you, Lily. I have loved you for 4 years." The crushing weight of all her misunderstandings completely vanished. The terrifying mafia boss was actually the man whose life she had saved with a simple act of kindness, and he had spent years building an empire just to keep her safe. Lily leaned down, pressing her lips gently against his in a kiss that tasted of salty tears and absolute forgiveness. There were no more secrets, no more contracts, and no more cages. A few weeks later, the Blackwood estate was no longer a cold fortress, but a warm, sunlit home. Thomas Evans, fully recovered with a strong new heart, proudly walked his daughter through the estate gardens. Julian stood waiting under an arch of white roses. He had abandoned his dark suits for a lighter appearance, his eyes entirely focused on the beautiful woman carrying his child. As Julian slid a simple, elegant diamond ring onto her finger, he dropped to one knee, kissing her hand and silently vowing to spend his entire life serving the queen who had given him a soul. We have reached the beautiful conclusion of this emotional journey. The story of Julian and Lily teaches us profound life lessons and holds deep humanistic values. It shows us that a single act of pure kindness, like offering a red umbrella on a rainy night, can echo through time and completely alter the course of destiny. It also reminds us that true love requires absolute honesty and open communication. Misunderstandings and unspoken fears can build terrifying walls between two hearts, but courage and selfless sacrifice have the power to tear those walls down. No matter how dark the circumstances may appear, true love looks past superficial titles and social status, focusing only on the sincere devotion hidden within the soul. If you found yourself deeply moved by this dramatic romance, please hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends so you can listen to many attractive videos every day. How did this story make you feel? Can you relate the struggles of misunderstandings and the power of kindness to your own real life? We strongly encourage you to leave a comment below to let us hear the genuine feelings from the bottom of your hearts. Goodbye and see you in the next video. We sincerely wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life every day, and absolute peace. Goodbye and see you in the next video.